courtroom was full before the session even began. People whispered in the wooden benches, the sound of their hushed voices blending into a restless hum. Sunlight came through the tall glass windows and spread over the floor like golden water. There was a tension in the air, a strange mix of excitement and doubt because this was not an ordinary day. The man standing at the front of the court was Sundar Pichai, known to the world as the quiet leader of one of the biggest companies on earth. But today he was not in a boardroom or a conference hall. He was in a courtroom where words were sharper than swords, and where power came not from technology but from truth, reason, and courage. Sundar looked calm, almost too calm for the storm that awaited him. He wore a simple dark suit, nothing extravagant, and his eyes carried a humility that made some people wonder if he truly understood what he was walking into. The lawyers on the other side smirked as if victory was already theirs. They whispered to each other and chuckled softly, as though they were preparing to watch a performance rather than face a serious challenge. The judge himself, a tall man with sharp eyes and a reputation for being stern, leaned back in his chair with an amused expression. "Mr. Pichai," the judge began in a voice that echoed across the chamber, "are you sure you want to do this without a legal team? This is not a business presentation. This is court. We have rules here." There was a ripple of laughter among the lawyers and even from some people in the gallery. The idea that Sundar, a man famous for his calm leadership but not known as a lawyer, would defend himself in such a complex case seemed almost laughable. Sundar smiled politely and nodded. "Your Honor," he said softly, his voice steady but filled with quiet conviction. "I respect this court, and I respect the law. I may not be a lawyer by profession, but I believe truth does not require a license to speak. It only requires courage." The judge raised an eyebrow, half amused and half surprised by the calmness in Sundar's tone. "Very well," he said, "but I must warn you. This court does not forgive foolishness." Those words, spoken with a faint smile, sounded like a warning but also like a challenge. Many in the room thought Sundar had already lost. After all, who would dare to face trained lawyers without a single legal degree? But Sundar's mind was not filled with fear. Instead, he remembered his journey, the long path from a modest home in Chennai to the world stage. He remembered the nights when his family had no telephone, and he had to walk far to make a call. He remembered the way his parents sacrificed so that he could study, and how his teachers believed in him when he doubted himself. Those memories did not just give him strength, they reminded him of his responsibility. He knew that this courtroom was not about winning or losing money. It was about proving that humility and truth could stand against arrogance and power. The lawyers on the opposing side opened their case with fiery energy. They attacked Sundar with words like arrows, accusing him of decisions, painting him as a man who had manipulated, twisted, and misled. They raised their voices, pounded the table, and filled the room with a storm of accusations. To many it seemed like a crushing tide that no single man could withstand. And yet Sundar stood still, listening with full attention, never interrupting, never letting impatience cloud his face. He listened with the patience of a man who had faced storms before, a man who had learned that noise was never stronger than truth. When it was his turn to speak, the room grew strangely quiet. The laughter that had filled the beginning of the trial now faded into silence. Sundar's voice was calm, almost gentle, but every word seemed to carry a weight that pulled people closer. "Your Honor," he began, "I stand here not because I am perfect, but because I believe in respect. I believe in humility. I believe that even in the hardest places like this courtroom, kindness and truth must guide us. I will answer every question, but I ask that we look not only at what is being said, but also at the intention behind it. Because in life, intention is what separates respect from insult, humility from arrogance, and justice from revenge." The judge leaned forward slightly, the amusement on his face beginning to fade. There was something in Sundar's words that did not sound like rehearsed lines. They sounded like lived truth. As Sundar continued, he surprised everyone. Instead of defending himself with complicated legal jargon, he told simple stories. He explained decisions through real human experiences. He painted pictures of ordinary workers, engineers, and families whose lives were affected by choices. He spoke of mistakes honestly, without fear, and then explained the lessons learned. At one point, when the opposing lawyer tried to trap him with a difficult question, Sundar responded with a story from his childhood. He described how his father taught him that when two people disagree, the real strength lies not in who shouts louder, but in who listens deeper. The courtroom fell into silence again, because no one expected a corporate leader to speak in such simple, heartfelt terms. But as the minutes passed, Sundar knew this was only the beginning. The real storm was yet to come, hidden in the documents, buried under arguments. There were truths that could shake the entire case, and Sundar had found them. He was waiting for the right moment, a moment that would turn laughter into silence and silence into shock. As the first day in court drew closer to its end, the judge looked at Sundar with new eyes. He no longer saw just a CEO trying to act like a lawyer. He saw a man who carried respect like armor, humility like a sword, and truth like fire. But just as the session was about to close, the opposing lawyer slammed down a folder with a grin. "Your Honor," he declared loudly, "we have evidence that will destroy Mr. Pichai's defense completely. And once we reveal it, this courtroom will see what kind of man stands before us." Gasps filled the air. Sundar turned his eyes toward the folder. And though his face remained calm, his mind raced. He knew what was coming, and he knew it would test not just his knowledge but his heart. The judge looked at Sundar with a small smile that carried both doubt and curiosity. "Mr. Pichai," he said, "tomorrow you will answer to this. Let us see if your calm words can survive when the storm truly begins." The gavel struck. The session ended, and as the people stood to leave, whispers filled the air again. Some said Sundar was finished. Others said they had never seen such composure. But one thing was clear. Tomorrow, the courtroom would not just be about law. It would be about the strength of a man's spirit. Sundar walked out slowly, his steps steady, but in his heart, he carried the weight of what was coming, because the folder held secrets, and those secrets could either destroy him or reveal a truth that no one in that room was ready for. And so part one ends, not with victory, but with suspense, as the shadow of tomorrow's trial looms heavy over Sundar Pichai. The next morning, the courtroom was heavier than before. As though the walls themselves had absorbed the tension from the day before, people filled the benches earlier than usual, whispering about the mysterious folder that had been dropped like a bomb at the end of yesterday's session. Every eye was fixed on the lawyers who carried it, their faces glowing with the confidence of hunters who believed they had finally cornered their prey. Sundar walked in quietly, his steps slow but steady, his expression calm but unreadable. His suit was the same simple dark one as before, and his hands carried no papers, no notes, only a small notebook filled with scribbles in his own handwriting. The judge entered with his usual stern posture, but his eyes betrayed a curiosity he could not hide. He wanted to see if Sundar's calmness would survive once the storm of evidence was released. The gavel struck, and the lawyer rose, holding the folder as if it were a crown jewel. He cleared his throat dramatically, then spread the papers across the table. "Your Honor," he said, his voice swelling with self-assurance, "inside this folder lies proof that Sundar Pichai is guilty of misrepresentation. He has hidden facts, twisted outcomes, and covered mistakes. This is not about respect or humility. This is about deception. Today we will expose him, and by the end of this session, the entire courtroom will know the truth." He turned towards Sundar with a smirk that carried both arrogance and triumph. Sundar did not move. His hands rested quietly on the wooden table, his face still carrying the same calm expression. Though his eyes had grown sharper, the lawyer began reading aloud from the documents, pointing to numbers and statements that appeared to contradict Sundar's earlier words. Every sentence was delivered with the force of a hammer. Each accusation meant to build a wall of doubt around him. Some in the gallery began to shake their heads, whispering that perhaps Sundar's courage had been foolish after all. The lawyer's words flowed like poison, and with each passing minute, the judge's face grew more serious. But then Sundar leaned forward, his voice soft yet cutting through the noise like a blade through silk. "May I see the document?" he asked. The lawyer laughed. "Of course, Mr. Pichai, but I doubt you will enjoy it." Sundar studied the paper for a long moment, his eyes moving carefully, his fingers tracing the lines as though he were reading not just the words but the intent behind them. Finally, he lifted his head. "Your Honor," he said gently, "this document is incomplete." The courtroom stirred. The lawyer frowned. "Incomplete?" "It is direct proof." Sundar shook his head slowly. Proof without context is not truth. A sentence cut from its paragraph, a number removed from its column, a moment stripped of its history. All of these can be made to look guilty. But the truth lives not in fragments. It lives in the whole story. The judge leaned closer, intrigued despite himself. "Explain," he ordered, and so Sundar did. He walked the courtroom through the numbers, not as a lawyer would, but as a teacher would explain to a student. He showed where the figures came from, how they connected and why they looked misleading when isolated. He spoke not with anger but with patience, as though even the lawyer accusing him was someone deserving of clarity, not condemnation. And slowly, the tide began to shift. The very numbers that had been used as weapons began to look different in the light of Sundar's explanation. The gallery leaned in, whispering less, listening more. Even the judge, who had begun the morning ready to see Sundar crushed, found his pen moving across paper, taking notes he had not expected to take. The lawyer grew frustrated. "Your Honor," he snapped, "he is trying to distract with stories and interpretations. The fact remains—" But Sundar raised his hand slightly, not in arrogance but in quiet strength. "No, sir," he said. "The fact remains that truth cannot be forced into a corner. You may laugh at simplicity, but simplicity is what reveals the lies hidden in complexity." His words struck the room like a bell. The judge's eyes narrowed, not in anger but in deep thought. For the first time, he began to see Sundar not as a businessman fumbling in a court of law, but as a man who understood the deeper essence of justice. That truth is not a matter of who speaks louder, but of who sees clearer. And yet, just when it seemed Sundar had untangled the trap, the lawyer revealed another blow. From the bottom of the folder, he pulled out a photograph, one that seemed damning in its silence. It showed Sundar in a private meeting, with a signature on a paper that appeared to contradict everything he had just explained. Gasps filled the air. The lawyer grinned, sensing victory again. "How will you explain this, Mr. Pichai? A picture does not lie." Sundar looked at the photograph, his face unreadable. Then he lifted his eyes toward the judge and said quietly, "Your Honor, may I tell you the story of this picture?" The judge hesitated, his gaze flicking between the lawyer's triumphant smile and Sundar's steady calm. "Proceed," he said at last. And with that, Sundar began to speak, his voice carrying not the tone of defense, but of revelation. He told a story that reached beyond the photograph, a story that would draw the courtroom into a past no one expected, a story that held within it not only the explanation of the picture, but also a deeper truth about integrity and sacrifice. But before he could finish, the gavel struck and the judge interrupted. "Enough for today. Tomorrow you will complete this story, Mr. Pichai. And it better be a story that holds against the evidence before us." The session closed, leaving the gallery restless, whispering furiously. Sundar walked out, still calm, but carrying the weight of tomorrow's burden. Because the story he was about to reveal was not just about defending himself. It was about exposing a hidden reality that could shake more than just this courtroom. And so the day ended, not in resolution but in suspense as the photograph burned in everyone's memory, waiting for Sundar's explanation. The third morning arrived with a different kind of energy in the air. The photograph from the day before had spread like wildfire outside the courtroom, whispered about in newsrooms and debated in cafes. People now filled the benches not just with curiosity but with hunger, eager to witness the unraveling of Sundar Pichai's calm. The photograph showed him in a private meeting, his hand signing a document that seemed to contradict everything he had claimed. The lawyer's smile was sharper than ever, and even the judge entered the room with a heavier expression, as though already preparing to deliver a verdict against him. Sundar walked in slowly, his head slightly bowed, carrying the same simple notebook in his hands. He looked like a man unshaken, though anyone watching closely could see the weight in his eyes. He greeted the judge with quiet respect, and for a moment, the silence in the room felt almost unbearable. The gavel struck, and the judge gestured for him to continue the story he had begun but was forced to stop the day before. Sundar stood tall, his voice calm but filled with an unusual depth. "Your Honor," he began, "yesterday a photograph was shown. A single moment frozen in time, stripped of its reason, stripped of its heart. Today I will tell you what that moment truly means." He paused, letting his eyes move across the courtroom. This picture was taken in a small hospital room far from the offices and the boardrooms you imagine. The paper I signed was not a secret agreement of greed, but a contract to fund the treatment of a child whose parents could not afford medicine. That meeting was not about profit. It was about life. The courtroom shifted. Murmurs rippled through the gallery. The lawyer frowned, shaking his head, but Sundar continued. "The signature you see was placed there because I believed that even in positions of power we must remain human first. The company lawyers told me not to do it, that it would set a dangerous precedent. But when I looked at that child lying in the bed with eyes full of pain yet still holding hope, I knew I had no choice. What is the use of success if it cannot be used to heal? What is the meaning of leadership if it cannot protect the weak?" His words filled the room like a tide, pulling everyone into the moment. The lawyer tried to object, his voice rising in protest. "Your Honor, this is irrelevant. This is not about charity. This is about the case." But the judge raised his hand to silence him. For the first time, the judge's stern face showed something softer, almost like respect. "No," he said, "it is very relevant. Continue, Mr. Pichai." Sundar nodded and went on. He described the hospital in detail. The cracked walls, the smell of disinfectant, the worn-out nurses doing their best with limited resources. He painted a picture so vivid that many in the room felt they could see it themselves. And then he spoke of the child's father, a man who had come to him not with demands but with folded hands, begging for a chance to save his only son. Sundar's voice trembled slightly as he recalled how he had seen his own father in that man. The same weary eyes of sacrifice, the same quiet dignity of struggle. "So yes," Sundar said, his voice rising with quiet strength. "I signed that paper. I signed it knowing it could be misunderstood, knowing it could be twisted. But I also knew that saving one life was worth more than protecting my own image. If that makes me guilty, then I accept the judgment." The courtroom fell into silence. The lawyer, who had thought the photograph would end the case, now looked unsettled, as though the ground had shifted beneath his feet. The gallery leaned forward, captivated not just by Sundar's defense but by the raw humanity in his words. The judge's pen stopped moving. He leaned back slowly, his eyes fixed on Sundar with an expression no one had seen before. It was no longer amusement, no longer skepticism. It was something closer to admiration, though the judge's pride prevented him from showing it openly. But just when it seemed Sundar had turned the tide again, the lawyer struck back with a sudden twist. He pulled out another paper, this one bearing Sundar's signature on a contract that was undeniably linked to financial gain. "And what about this, Mr. Pichai?" he demanded. "This is not about saving children. This is about saving profits. Will you tell another story for this signature too?" The gallery gasped. The judge's eyes narrowed again. Sundar looked at the paper, his expression steady but thoughtful. For a long moment he said nothing, and the silence grew heavy, almost suffocating. Then he closed his eyes briefly, as if reaching deep into memory, and opened them again with renewed calm. "Yes," he said quietly. "I will tell the story of this one too. But I warn you, Your Honor, this story is not simple. It is not one of charity alone. It is one of betrayal, of choices that tore me apart, and of lessons that changed me forever." The judge leaned forward, intrigued. "Then tell it," he said. Sundar nodded slowly, his voice carrying a weight that promised revelations no one expected. "To understand this contract," he began, "you must first understand the night that changed everything for me. A night when I was forced to choose between loyalty to a friend and loyalty to what was right." And with those words, the courtroom leaned into silence once more, knowing that what was about to unfold would not just be a defense, but a story that reached into the very core of human struggle. The courtroom on the fourth morning was unlike any of the days before. It was no longer just a place of law and order. It had become a theater of human truth, where each day revealed not only facts but pieces of a soul. The gallery was packed tighter than ever, people standing along the walls just to catch a glimpse of Sundar Pichai as he walked in, still carrying his small notebook, still calm, still humble. But today his face carried something heavier, something that even silence could not hide. The lawyer sat waiting, his stack of papers taller than before, his smirk sharper, ready to pierce Sundar's calm with the weight of contracts and signatures. The judge looked down at both men with eyes that no longer mocked but measured, as though he too was caught between the storm of law and the tide of humanity. Sundar stood and began to speak, his voice steady yet threaded with a quiet sorrow. "Your Honor, yesterday I said that this contract was tied to betrayal. Today I will tell you why. It began with a friend, a man who stood beside me when I was young and uncertain, a man who encouraged me when I doubted myself. He was not only a friend but like a brother, someone I trusted more than anyone in those early years. And it was he who first brought me the contract you now hold." He paused, and the silence deepened as the courtroom leaned into his words. The contract promised growth, promised profit, promised expansion. It looked like opportunity, and my friend spoke of it with fire in his eyes, telling me that together we could change everything. And for a moment I believed him. I signed because I trusted not just the paper, but the man who placed it before me. Sundar's eyes lowered, his voice softening. But what I did not know was that hidden inside the fine lines were traps. Clauses that shifted responsibility, numbers that disguised greed, terms that placed the burden on workers who had no voice. My friend knew it, but I did not, and when the truth surfaced, it was not he who was blamed. It was me. My name was on the signature. My face was tied to the decision, and my heart carried the shame. Gasps rippled through the room, and the lawyer quickly rose to strike back. Your Honor, he admits it, he signed. Whether he was betrayed or not, the responsibility was his. Ignorance is not innocence. But Sundar lifted his head, his calm unbroken. You are right, he said quietly. Ignorance is not innocence. I take responsibility for that signature. But responsibility does not mean silence. Responsibility means learning, changing, refusing to repeat the mistake no matter the cost. I will not deny that I failed in that moment. I failed to see the truth. I failed to protect those who depended on me, and it broke something inside me. But it also rebuilt something stronger. The belief that true leadership is not about never falling. It is about rising differently each time you do. The judge leaned back slowly, his pen pausing above the page, his face caught between sternness and thought. The gallery listened in silence, some nodding, some holding their breath as if the words had touched something buried in their own lives. Sundar continued, his voice gaining quiet strength. I confronted my friend when I discovered the truth. I asked him why, and he laughed. He told me that in the world of business, loyalty was weakness, and trust was a tool to be used. He said I was naive to believe in kindness, naive to believe in humility. He said the world belonged to those willing to betray before being betrayed. And that night, standing in front of a man I once called brother, I realized the greatest betrayal was not of me. It was of himself. Because in chasing profit, he lost the one thing no wealth can buy, respect. The room was heavy with silence. The lawyer's smirk faltered for the first time, his eyes narrowing as if he could not decide whether Sundar's words were strategy or confession. The judge tapped his fingers lightly on the desk, his gaze fixed on Sundar as though searching for the smallest crack in his calm, but finding none. Then the lawyer snapped back, raising another paper. And what about this, Mr. Pichai? You speak of betrayal, of lessons, of growth. But here is another agreement with your signature. Another proof that you continued the same pattern. Will you tell us another sad story to escape responsibility? The gallery stirred, whispers filling the room once more. The judge looked at Sundar with sharp expectation, as though the balance of the case now hung on the next few words. Sundar took the paper in his hand, studied it, and then lifted his eyes toward the judge. Your Honor, he said quietly, I will not escape responsibility. This agreement is mine, and I will not deny it. But this one is different. This one was not a betrayal by another. This one was my choice, and the reason behind it will shock you. Because this paper, this signature, was not about protecting myself. It was about protecting someone else. Someone who did not even know I was protecting them. His words sent a ripple of anticipation through the courtroom. The judge leaned forward, his eyes narrowing with interest. And who was that? He asked. Sundar drew a deep breath, his face carrying both pain and resolve. It was my father, he said softly. And the story begins long before I stood in this courtroom, long before I ever signed my first contract. It begins in a small home in Chennai, where my father taught me the meaning of sacrifice. The gavel struck, the judge halting the session for the day, leaving the courtroom buzzing with questions. Whispers rose like smoke. People desperate to know what story would follow. What secret tied Sundar's father to the contract now resting in evidence? Sundar closed his notebook gently, bowed his head slightly to the judge, and walked out of the courtroom with the same quiet steps, leaving behind a silence heavier than words. And so the day ended with yet another cliffhanger, the truth buried deeper still, waiting for tomorrow when Sundar would reveal how a father's sacrifice had shaped his choices, and why even his signatures carried the weight of love. The fifth morning came with a quiet tension that pressed against the walls of the courtroom like an unseen weight. By now the trial had become more than a case. It had become a story the world was following. A story of humility standing against arrogance, of a man accused yet unbroken. The benches were filled beyond capacity, and people stood shoulder to shoulder, their faces eager, restless, and anxious for what Sundar Pichai would reveal. Yesterday he had ended with a single name, his father, and the silence that followed carried into the night like a shadow. Today that shadow would speak. Sundar entered slowly, his hands holding the same worn notebook that had followed him each day, the one filled with scribbles and notes that seemed more like reflections than strategies. He did not look at the gallery nor at the lawyer waiting with another pile of accusations. nor even at the judge whose sternness had softened into something more curious than cruel. He looked down at the table before him, placed the notebook gently, and when the gavel struck, he raised his head and began. "Your Honor," Sundar said softly, "yesterday I told you this signature was not about myself. It was about my father. To understand it, you must first understand the man who shaped my life. My father was not wealthy. He worked long hours, often in silence, carrying burdens no one saw. Our home in Chennai was small, the walls thin, the nights filled with the hum of fans that barely cut through the heat. But inside that home lived a strength that no poverty could erase. My father taught me that respect is worth more than money, that humility can open doors pride can never touch, and that sacrifice is the silent language of love." He paused, his voice steady but tinged with memory. "When I was young, I watched him give up his own comfort so I could study. I saw him skip meals so I would not go hungry. I saw him walk miles to save bus fare, just so I could have the books I needed. He never complained, never asked for anything in return, and it was only years later that I learned how much debt he had taken upon himself for my education. Debt that he carried quietly, without telling even my mother. He bore it because he believed in me, because he saw in me what I could not yet see in myself." The gallery grew silent, every word pulling them deeper. Sundar continued, his voice carrying more weight now. "When I rose in my career, I thought of him with every step. And then came a day when his name was tied to a financial agreement that could have ruined him. He had unknowingly been drawn into a trap, much like the one I later faced with my friend. And when I discovered it, I was left with two choices. I could let the truth surface and watch my father's dignity collapse under the weight of blame, or I could sign the paper myself, take the burden onto my shoulders, and carry the blame that was meant for him." He lifted the contract from the table, the very one the lawyer had waved as proof of guilt, and held it in his hand. "This is that paper. This is that choice. I did not sign it for money. I did not sign it for profit. I signed it for a man who once walked miles so I could hold a pencil. I signed it for a man who gave me everything without asking for anything back. I signed it because I could not let the world laugh at the dignity of the man who taught me what dignity means." The silence in the room was heavy, almost holy. The lawyer shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his smirk gone, his hands restless as though searching for words that would not come. The judge's eyes had softened, his pen resting unused upon the desk. In the gallery, some people lowered their heads and others blinked back tears they did not expect to feel in a courtroom. But Sundar was not finished. His voice grew stronger, steadier, filled with a quiet fire. "Your Honor, responsibility is not always about law. Sometimes it is about love. Sometimes it is about carrying pain so that someone else does not have to. If this court sees me as guilty for protecting my father, then so be it. I will accept that judgment, but do not mistake it for weakness. It was not weakness that guided my hand. It was strength, the kind of strength born from humility, the kind of strength that carries respect even when the world calls it foolish." The judge leaned back slowly, his expression unreadable, though his eyes betrayed the storm of thought inside him. The lawyer leapt to his feet, desperate to strike back, his voice shaking with forced conviction. "Your Honor, this is not law. This is sentiment. The court cannot be swayed by stories of fathers and sacrifices. The evidence stands. The signatures remain. He admits them himself. This case is clear." But the words felt hollow in the heavy silence that followed Sundar's confession. The gallery did not stir, their eyes fixed on Sundar as though waiting for him to speak again. And he did. "Your Honor," Sundar said gently, "this trial is not just about me. It is about what kind of world we choose to honor. Do we honor those who twist truth for gain? Or do we honor those who carry burdens for love? Do we see humility as weakness, or do we see it as the strength that holds families, communities, and even nations together? This courtroom is not only a place of law, it is a mirror of who we are. And when we walk out of here, the reflection will remain." His words hung in the air long after he finished, pressing into the hearts of everyone who heard them. The judge tapped his gavel lightly, not to silence but to steady himself. The lawyer sat back down, his hands trembling slightly, his papers suddenly less powerful than the truth spoken without them. But just as the room seemed to sway fully toward Sundar's side, the lawyer pulled one last card from his pile. His voice rose sharp and defiant. "If you wish to play with emotions, Mr. Pichai, then let us bring in someone who will strip away your stories. Tomorrow, Your Honor, we will bring a witness who knows Mr. Pichai's past better than anyone else. And when that witness speaks, No story of fathers or sacrifices will save him. The judge looked at the lawyer, then back at Sundar, whose calm remained unbroken, though his eyes darkened slightly with thought. Very well, the judge said, striking the gavel. Tomorrow we hear this witness. The gallery erupted in whispers, some gasping, some speculating, all desperate to know who the witness would be. Sundar closed his notebook, bowed his head slightly, and walked out of the courtroom once more, leaving behind the promise of yet another storm. And so part 5 ended not with victory, but with a new shadow, a witness waiting in the wings, holding secrets that could either destroy Sundar or reveal truths that would shake the courtroom to its core. The 6th morning arrived with a silence that felt louder than any sound. The air inside the courtroom was heavy, charged with expectation because today the mysterious witness would appear. The gallery was filled beyond measure, with people even standing in the corridors outside hoping to catch the faintest echo of what was to come. Some had come to see Sundar Pichai fall, others to see him rise, but all knew they were about to witness something unforgettable. The lawyer sat proudly at his desk, his pile of papers almost untouched, his smile sharp with anticipation. He believed this was the day he would finally end Sundar's defense. The judge entered with slower steps, his eyes fixed on Sundar as though trying to read a future that had not yet been spoken. Sundar walked in quietly, holding the same small notebook that had followed him each day. His face was calm, but his eyes held a depth that suggested he was ready for whatever storm awaited. He bowed slightly to the judge, then sat, his hands resting lightly on the wooden table. When the gavel struck, the lawyer rose with confidence and declared, "Your Honor, today we present a witness who knows Mr. Pichai's past better than anyone else. This witness will reveal the truth that his stories have hidden, and once it is heard, there will be no doubt left in this court." The doors opened, and the witness stepped in. Gasps swept across the room, because the man who entered was none other than Sundar's old friend, the very friend he had spoken of, the man who had betrayed him years ago. His face carried the arrogance of someone who believed he still held the power to wound. His eyes locked onto Sundar's with a cold smile, as though daring him to speak. The judge gestured for the man to take the stand. "State your name," he ordered. The man spoke clearly, his voice steady. "I am Ravi Krishna, once a close friend of Sundar Pichai." The lawyer wasted no time. "Mr. Krishna, tell this court about Sundar. Tell them the truth behind the contracts, the signatures, the betrayals. Tell them who he really is." Ravi leaned forward, his words smooth, practiced. He spoke of ambition, of deals made in secret, of Sundar's willingness to bend truth for advantage. He painted pictures of greed, of decisions that placed profit above people. The gallery stirred, whispers rising, doubt creeping back into their faces. The lawyer smiled with triumph, believing his witness had struck the final blow. But Sundar did not interrupt. He listened, his eyes steady on the man who had once been his brother in friendship. He waited until the lawyer finished, until the room swelled with the sound of murmurs, until even the judge looked weighed down with uncertainty. Then he stood, his voice soft yet carrying across the room like a calm wave breaking against rocks. "Your Honor," Sundar said, "may I ask the witness a question?" The judge hesitated, then nodded. "You may." Sundar turned to Ravi, his eyes gentle, almost sorrowful. "Ravi," he said quietly, "do you remember the night we both sat in that small room in Chennai with nothing but 2 candles and a dream we believed in? Do you remember how you told me that no matter where life took us, we would never let ambition make us forget who we were?" Ravi's smile faltered just slightly, but he nodded. "I remember." Sundar stepped closer, his voice still calm. "And do you remember the night I discovered the contract you had hidden? Do you remember how I came to you not with anger but with hope? Hoping you would explain, hoping you would stand beside me and say it was a mistake? Do you remember what you said to me then?" Ravi's face tightened. He did not answer. The silence stretched. Sundar turned to the judge, his voice steady. "Your Honor, what he said was this: loyalty is weakness and kindness is foolishness. He told me that trust is a tool, not a bond. That was the night I lost a friend, but it was also the night I found my path. Because I chose not to believe him. I chose to believe in respect and humility and resilience. I chose to carry my mistakes, to learn, to grow, and to never betray the values my father raised me with." The gallery fell into silence again, the weight of Sundar's words pressing into every heart. Ravi shifted in his seat, his arrogance cracking under the gaze of the room. The lawyer tried to interrupt, but the judge raised his hand, his eyes fixed on Ravi. Answer him, the judge commanded. Did you say those words? Ravi hesitated, his mouth opening, closing, then finally lowering his eyes. Yes, he admitted softly. A wave of murmurs swept through the gallery. The lawyer's face turned pale, his confidence collapsing. The judge's expression hardened, then slowly softened as he looked back at Sundar. You may continue, he said. Sundar bowed his head slightly in respect. Your Honor, I have never claimed to be without fault. I have stumbled, I have signed papers I should have read more carefully. I have trusted when I should have questioned, but I have never betrayed the values that shaped me. I have never chosen greed over dignity or arrogance over respect. If that makes me guilty in the eyes of law, I accept it. But in the eyes of humanity, I stand by every choice because each choice was born of humility, of kindness, and of love. The silence that followed was unlike any before. It was not the silence of doubt nor of suspense. It was the silence of respect. The kind that rises only when truth has spoken louder than any evidence. The gallery rose slowly to their feet. Not in noise, not in applause, but in quiet acknowledgement. The judge looked down, his eyes wet, though his voice remained firm. Mr. Pichai, he said, this court has heard enough. The laughter that greeted you on your first day has no place here now. The truth you have spoken has cut deeper than any argument. The charges are dismissed. The gavel struck and the trial ended. The lawyer sank into his chair, defeated. Ravi left the stand with his head bowed, his arrogance shattered, and Sundar Pichai stood quietly, bowing his head to the judge, then turning to leave the courtroom with the same calm steps he had entered with each day. Outside, the world waited, hungry for his words, but Sundar did not speak of victory. He spoke only of respect. Never mistake humility for weakness, he said softly to those who gathered. It is the strongest force we have. It can endure laughter. It can endure betrayal, and still it rises, because it is built not on pride but on love. And with that, he walked away, not as a man who had won a case, but as a man who had reminded the world that true greatness lies not in power, but in humility, kindness, and resilience.